I think we are live. Yes, let me quickly check. Yep, we are live. So, hello, enthusiastic people. How are you? I hope all of you are fit and fine. This is your instructor, Rishabh, and let us begin with. All right, so let me quickly share my screen, and then today we will be talking about Newtonian forces. Okay, so to give you a recap, in the last session, we have talked about the fundamental forces, the four fundamental forces of this universe, namely gravitational force, electromagnetic force, strong nuclear force, and weak nuclear force. In this particular session, we are going to talk about the forces that are present in Newtonian mechanics. So, without any delay, let us begin with it. So, let's write forces. The first force that we want to understand here is called as a gravitational force. Now, this gravitational force is it is originated from this force itself. So I'll just make a tree diagram sort of thing for the forces, and then we'll talk about them in detail one by one. Okay, so let me give you an overview of it. So the first force that we have is gravitational force. So first force that we have is gravitational force. Okay, that is basically the earth is, if let's suppose we are standing on the earth is pulling us down, so that becomes your gravitational force. Now what's the next force? The next force that we have is called as contact force. Now what is this contact force? This force comes into picture only when objects are touching each other. Okay, and there are two types of contact force that we have. One is called as, do you know the name? Yes, it is called as normal force. And another one is called as friction force. Now, this friction is again divided into two more parts. The friction is again divided into two more parts, and those are kinetic friction and static friction. Kinetic friction is the friction that acts when the object is moving. Let's suppose, um, yeah, this is an object. Okay, it is placed on my hand. Okay, if I'm pushing it, it is moving. But at the same time, there is some friction forces also acting because it is moving. While it is moving, my hand is offering some friction force. That friction force is called as kinetic friction. And in the second scenario, let's suppose if I'm pushing, I'm applying some force. Okay, it's not like I'm just touching it. I'm applying very little amount of force, but it is not moving. Why? Because the friction force is resisting. So when I am applying a force on it and it is not moving, that means the static friction is balancing out the force that I am applying. So that is your static friction force, which acts when the object is at rest. Now, these are the two forces. Now, the one more force that we have is, just let me just quickly draw an arrow for that as well. Uh, I don't know when will I learn to, draw straight lines. Let me try one more time. Okay, I think this is doable. This is workable. So the next force up after contact force that we have is called as tension. Okay, tension force. Tension force is basically when you take a string and you pull it, you stretch it, or you try to stretch it. Okay, what happens? It becomes sort of rigid. That force is called as tension force. And the last force that we have is called as spring force. Oops, not this color. Spring force is basically when you have springs, if you compress them or if you stretch them. So while compressing and stretching, the spring itself applies a force. That particular force is called as spring force. Okay, so I hope the whole overview is clear to you. If that is clear, we can begin with gravitational force. So let's start with The first one, gravitational force. Now, this gravitational force, let's understand what exactly it is and how we apply it. So, if there is an object placed on the ground, this is the block placed on the ground. So, the gravitational pull by the earth will pull the mass downward. So, there will be a force applied on the block, which is your gravitational force. And this Fg, gravitational force, is equal to mass of the block multiplied by g, where m refers to mass of the block and g refers to acceleration due to gravity, which is approximately equal to 9.81 meter per second square. That is your gravitational force. This force always acts vertically down. Okay, when we are talking on the earth, always acts vertically down or downward. So if I give an example, let's take an inclined plane. Okay, it is inclined at some angle. Let's call it as 30 degree. Okay, so now we have the mass here. So where should the mass act? Where should the gravitational force act? It will act straight down. This would be your mg force, okay, or gravitational force. So I hope we are clear with the concept of gravitational force. Now, if that is clear, we can move on to the next part. What was the next part? Do you remember? Yes. Next part or next force is called as contact force. Contact force. Force that comes into picture when objects are touching each other. Force that comes into picture when two bodies touch each other. Each other. Okay. So there are two types of contact force that we have. One is called as the normal force, another is called as the friction force. Let's quickly talk about the normal force. So I'll say this is the number one, normal force. Now, what is this normal force? This normal force is the reaction force offered by the ground. See, what happens is that when the earth pulls the object below, when it is pulling the object, so basically an mg amount of force is being applied on the ground. So according to Newton's third law, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So if someone is applying a force of mg on the surface on the ground, so the ground in returns apply a force back up. That force is called as your normal force. So it is the reaction force applied by any surface. Let me give you an example. If let's take the same example, the simplest one. If you have a surface and then you have a block, okay. So because of the gravity, an mg force will be acting in the downward direction. This is force due to gravity. So in return, because this force is being applied on the surface because of the mass of the object, block this block m is pushing the ground in the downward direction. So it is according to Newton's third law, this ground will push back the mass in the upward direction. That force is called as normal force. Sometimes people write it as Fn. I usually like to write it as n, but yeah, we'll write it as Fn, representing the normal force. Okay, so Fn is your reaction force. Let's take another example. What if It's an inclined plane, some angle. Let's call it as theta. If the block is placed here, now what will happen? Mg will act straight down. Mg, that is force due to gravity, will act straight down. So where will the normal force act? Where will the normal force act? It will act here. Now this force is perpendicular to the surface. Normal force is always perpendicular to the surface. Let me write as Fn. Normal force is perpendicular to the surface. It's always perpendicular to the surface. Okay. All right. So that is your contact force. Now moving on to the next kind of force. The next contact force that we have is called as friction force. Friction force is the resistance offered by the surface to other surface. Okay, let me explain you why this friction force even exists. Okay, at fundamental level, why does this force even exist? So if I have a surface and a block placed on it, let me change the color of the block. So let's say we have a block and a surface like this. Now here it may look that the surface is smooth, but in reality, if you just zoom in here, if you just zoom in, what you're gonna see is completely different. If you observe the same thing under a microscope, this is what you will see. This surface is made up of, like, zigzag pattern, up, down, in a cove-like structure. This is the surface. And on top of that surface, this object is placed. This object, the surface of this object will be somewhat get fixed into the zigzag structure of the surface. So it stuck into each other like a comb. So they cannot move ahead or behind. Okay, this is the structure. If you want to break this kind of structure, you need to apply a lot of force so that this structure breaks and it moves ahead. So this is how the object looks under microscope. This is your block. Okay, so that's why your friction exists. Now, I said there are two types of friction force. One is called as kinetic friction, another is called as static friction. Now, to calculate friction force, we have a general formula, which is friction force, which is given by small f, which is equal to mu times Fn. Mu refers to coefficient of friction. If it is at rest, we will be using coefficient of static friction. If it is in motion, we will use coefficient of kinetic friction. And this is your normal force. So if we start with kinetic friction, second part A, kinetic friction. Now, kinetic friction is a very simple concept. Why? Because let's suppose if you have a surface on that surface, this is the object, and this object is moving with some acceleration or some velocity. It is moving to the right. Moving to right. Okay. Now, friction force is a resistive force. It opposes the motion. So where should the friction force act? It should act in the backward direction. This is called as Fk, kinetic friction. It's given by F subscript K. Question is, how do you calculate the kinetic friction force? Very simple. We know kinetic friction would be equal to mu, which is general formula. Now this time we will call it as mu K. Mu K refers to coefficient of kinetic friction multiplied by Fn. coefficient of kinetic friction, and Fn refers to normal force. So the question is, what is the value of normal force and what is the value of mu k? Mu k can be anything. It is a number which ranges from 0 to 1. Okay, it's a coefficient, depends on different surfaces. But what is normal force? See, your mg is acting downward, that is your gravitational force, and this is the normal force. The normal force and mg force balance each other. So I can say normal force is equal to mg. So in this particular case, I would be able to say Fk is equal to mu k times mg. All right. I hope this is clear. Okay. Now, what if the surface is inclined? What if the surface is inclined? What would be your normal force? Mg is going to act in the downward direction. This is angle theta. This is your normal force. And friction force, because this object is sliding down, so the friction force should act in the backward direction. So you want to calculate friction force, Fk, that would be equal to mu k times normal force. Question is, what would be the normal force? And that is your homework. You have to identify what is the normal force. You have to comment down what is the normal force, and I'll answer this in the next session. Okay, so find normal force. Okay, all right. Now remains the static friction. Now, static friction is little different than kinetic friction. Static friction works in little different way. So that we will be doing in the next live. So before that, before going to that part, I want to ask you one question. This is a man that I'm drawing, or this is a person, basically any person. And this person is moving in the forward direction. Okay, this is his hand, beautiful hairs. Okay, he's moving to the right, this way. And this is ground. He's walking on the ground. Question is, when he's moving in the forward direction, what is the direction of friction force? When the person is moving to right, what is the direction of friction force? Okay, and that is for you to answer in the comments. All right. So I think, yeah, that is all for today. I will see you in the next one. Until then, have a good day or a good night.